Alright, today we're doing one of my all-time favorites, meatloaf. What's better than meat? Meat in loaf form. I'm going to use 2.5 pounds of ground chuck, which I think is the most flavorful. It's 80% lean to 20% fat, which is the ratio I suggest. Here's the real secret though. You got to put some vegetables in your meatloaf to give it flavor and, more importantly, moisture. So all these ingredients will be on the site, but I got half an onion, half a bell pepper, 3 cloves of garlic, some carrots, some celery, and 4 mushroom caps. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a very fine dice out of those, almost a puree, with our food processor. So that's the bad news. I never make you use this thing, so don't get mad. But for this recipe, so important. So pull that out of your closet or out of your cupboard. I think it's on the cupboard on the left behind the Tupperware. All right, dust that thing off. And I want you to pulse the vegetables on and off. By the way, cut them up first. All right, if you put them in whole, they're too hard. So cut them up in small chunks. Do a couple batches at a time, and you want it just like that. Look at that. Pay attention to that. See? They're very, very, very fine, pureed almost, but not liquefied. Okay, so get them very small, but don't make a slush out of it. We got almost a cup of breadcrumb. I have 1 whole egg, tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce, Worcestershire, you know what I mean. Teaspoon of dry Italian herbs. And here's the seasoning mix. I go with 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, and a half a teaspoon of cayenne. Now again, that's based on the 2.5 pounds of meat. Preheat your oven to 325, and let's get mixing. So there's my 2.5 pounds of chuck. Now I have a method where I like to mix in the wet ingredients, give it a little mix first, then I'll mix in my breadcrumbs. Okay? So dump in your veggies. And again, you want to make sure those are nice and fine. If you got big chunks of carrot and onion, those are just not going to cook enough, and you're going to bite into them, and it's not going to be pleasant. Dump in your the sauce that starts with W. All right, we're going to put in our egg, and again, I just gave it a little beating with a fork, so that's 1 large egg. All right, you're going to dump in your teaspoon of dried herbs. Now again, I'm using a classic Italian mix: thyme, basil, rosemary, marjoram, etc. You can use any dry herb you like. In fact, no, you can't. Use the one I'm using. And there's my spice mix. Again, 2 teaspoons of salt. Again, in general, it's about a teaspoon of salt per pound of meat for this type of stuff. So I went with 2 teaspoons of salt for 2.5 pounds of meat. Should be just about perfect. I gave it about a 1-minute mix with a wooden spoon. Then I dumped in my almost cup of breadcrumb. And now I'm going to go bare hand on this meatloaf. And I'm not going to use 2 hands and attack it and it'd be violent. I'm going to gently, with my fingertips, almost lovingly, mix in the breadcrumbs just until it comes together. You don't want to overmix your meatloaf. You'll have tough meatloaf. We want tender meatloaf. So be tender when you mix in the breadcrumb. And you can tell when they're mixed. Basically, the breadcrumbs just disappear and form it into a ball. Again, that took me maybe a minute and a half to mix those breadcrumbs in. Some people need that thing for 10 minutes, and then they wonder why their meatloaf is tough. All right, I'm going to put just a couple drips of olive oil in my baking dish. Use something with the sides that has a little bit of a side to it. It's a good amount of fat's going to drip out of this, and you want to run it all over your stove. So go ahead and take your ball of meat and form it into a meat loaf. Now, what I did is I dipped my fingers in cold water. Wet, cold fingers don't stick to meat. It's proven culinary fact. So this lets me shape this very easily without a lot of mess. And I'm going to go about 4 inches high by about 6 inches across. Okay? I think that's going to cook nice and evenly. And again, my cooking times I'm giving you are based on this shape. So if you put this in some kind of mold or something, you're going to have to make sure you check your internal temperature at the end. But I want it nice and smooth. I want it nice and even. Just not so much for looks, but so it cooks evenly. Now we're going to give it a pre-baking. 15 minutes at 325. Then we're going to put a glaze on it. So while that's baking for 15 minutes, we're going to make a very simple glaze. That's 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. All right, about a tablespoon or 2 of ketchup. And of course, exact measurements don't really matter here. It's just a nice kind of sweet sour glaze for the top. This is a classic mustard, ketchup, brown sugar. All right, about a big spoon of mustard. I'll put the measurements on the site, like I say. By the way, if you're only watching these on YouTube, you're missing all the good stuff. Go to foodwishes.com for the story, for the ingredients. All right, I give it a shot of hot pepper sauce. I'm using an Asian sriracha sauce. You can use just regular Tabasco. And that's it. Just a real simple glaze to put on top of that meat. So after 15 minutes, I pulled it out of the oven. I dumped my glaze on top. All right, so I'm going to start with the top like I'm doing a cake. Don't go down the sides yet, because what will happen is this will all drip down and burn onto the bottom of the pan. So get it all on the top. Once that's on the top, then pull a little bit down with the back of the spoon and just give the sides a little bit. So you want the glaze mostly on top, so when you slice it, you got that nice red ring. And then you're going to put it back in the oven. We're looking for an internal temperature of 155. Use your thermometer. It's going to be about 30, 35, maybe 40 minutes, depending on the size and how you shaped it. But that's what it'll look like when it's done. You know what would have been a great idea? Put some foil in the pan. Too late. So anyway, that cooked for about 35 minutes. 155 gives you a perfect doneness. Let it cool before you slice it, otherwise you lose all those juices. But you can actually see those little speckles of vegetables in there. That's what keeps it very moist, very flavorful. Just a beautiful dinner. I went very classic here. Mashed potato, buttered peas, my top secret mushroom gravy / sauce that I will show next week sometime. So if you're tuning in, you'll see that. Really nice recipe. But that is just one of my favorite dinners of all time. And meatloaf is so easy to make. There's no excuse to make bad meatloaf. What people call meatloaf is actually just a giant baked hamburger. You got to get the veggies in there for the moisture and so forth. So I really hope you give this a try and enjoy.